All right, well, I think we should start with prayer, right? Does anybody want to pray for us? Or do you want me to do it?
I'll do it.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth.
Dear Lord, I just want to thank you for us meeting together and coming as a group to worship you and to honor you. Lord, I just ask that you be with Dr. Giltner as he gives an incredible speech. And let us open our hearts and our minds to understand the information and just have a good night and to take what we learn with us back to our homes. In your dear son's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, so I have, you said 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So, do you guys normally do this as a speaker type series? Is this?
Once in a while, every semester we have some.
Okay, all right, cool. Well, tell me, let's start off with just a little bit of discussion. So, what have you guys been talking about?
This is my first time.
Well, then please tell us.
Salvation history.
Salvation history. What else? You've been talking about the Bible?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the Bible? What's the Bible? What's the Bible's deal?
One thing we did talk about how it started with like God's creation, and then it like went down. We talked about like the generations and how it all links onto Jesus, and how like I forget, like you had awesome notes, Elise, about it, like with the pictures and.
Got some cool pictures.
Yeah.
So that's a good start. Creation goes down to, I think you said down to Jesus.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? Let me make Jesus a little color. Okay, so we've got a rough little outline of the Bible here so far. Creation, Jesus. What else do we know about the Bible? That much, huh? You're in one of my classes. I know you know more about the Bible. What else do we know about the Bible?
Okay. Well, since it starts with creation, we have the fall of man.
Oh yeah, we got the fall. It's important. What's the fall?
That is when, so Eve was, let's see, that's the wrong word, tricked by Satan to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge.
What kind of fruit was it?
An apple.
No. It just says forbidden fruit.
Oh, right.
But he has since said it was an apple. We know it could have been a kumquat. I think a Chinese orange. Not really sure though. Yes. Eve was tricked.
And then she told Adam, like, hey, you should eat some of this. And then they God made them realize that they sinned. And they realized they were naked. And they realized, and then like God threw them out of the garden. And then a lot of hardship started to come with their life. And then it goes to Cain and Abel.
Yes. Cain and Abel.
Yeah. Like it all has a theme, like don't disobey God, or there's gonna be some bad consequences, but then like that comes back in the butt when Cain kills Abel. And then they have that
First
trickle-
murder.
Yeah, and this like trickles down to the point of where humanity is constantly sinning, constantly turning their back on God, and it came to the point where God had enough, and that's when we got the flood.
Yeah.
But it
So
was-
that's Noah, right? Noah and the flood. And then Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God makes a covenant with them. And then, how far did you guys get in your Bible study?
Moses.
Moses.
Yes.
Who's Moses? What's Moses' deal? I want to hear from Kathy.
I don't really know.
You don't really know.
No.
Where you going?
This is my first one this semester.
Oh. Well, so you, Marissa, or Sydney?
Be part of the city.
He did part the Red Sea. For what reason? Was he just playing around?
To set his people free.
Okay, that's right. Where do we go from there? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
With Moses, so like before let me back up a little bit. Pharaoh didn't I forget how it all plays out but all of the first males had to be Pharaoh and his men were wiping out the first males of each family. But Moses' mother, his biological mom, saved him, put him in a basket, sent him down the river, and then Pharaoh's daughter found him, raised him in Pharaoh's home, and then Moses realized, everything that Pharaoh was doing to God's chosen people, and Moses, he murdered a guy, and then Pharaoh cast him away. And
Not exactly. He killed an Egyptian, and then he ran away as a fugitive. And that's when he has the experience with the burning bush,
Yes.
marries his wife, Zipporah, and then gets called back to set the Israelites free. The plagues, the 10 plagues of Egypt. Now, it's easy to get caught in the details of these stories. So I want to ask a different question than is often asked. We get caught up in these little stories, and that's good. And all these stories have particular meaning to themselves. But the Bible is not just a collection of stories. So, for example, yes, Moses is a very interesting story. But why? Is it just because he did some interesting things? I mean, it's interesting to bring plagues upon an entire ancient nation and free your kin from slavery. But who cares in the end? What does Moses have to do with the Bible as a whole? Or any character?
I think it has to do with keeping his faith and trust in God. And when God, tells him to go and talk to Pharaoh and set his people free, he's not, God, I don't know.
He kind of did, though, actually.
Yeah.
So when God says go, Moses says, okay, I get that you're God and everything, but I don't speak that well. Could you just send somebody else? And the burning bush, who is an manifestation of God, what the? Pretend you didn't see that. Can we take that off the video? And then God says to him, who made mouths? Who made man to use mouths? You go. I'll tell you what to say. Moses says, about that. See, I don't know if you heard me the first time, but I really don't talk that well. So if you could really just send somebody else, that'd be great. He's like, all right, fine. I'll let Aaron speak for you. Aaron was Moses' brother. But yeah, it's a good story. And yes, Moses is faithful, but there's a lot of faithful people. What's so important about Moses? Or Abraham, or Isaac, or Jacob? What is the overarching story? That's, I think, a question we don't ask enough. Moses fits into a story. He's not just one story amongst other stories. So, this room has great acoustics. I'm just realizing this. I feel like my voice is really... So anyway, So let's talk for a second about story. Has anybody here ever been in love? What does that mean?
I'm embarrassed to raise my hand.
Why? Being in love is a totally normal
It's just a
thing.
strange question.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. So will you tell us all the details? No, I'm just kidding. Are you still with this person that you're in love with? Okay. You get married, I think?
Pretty sure.
Pretty
they
sure,
know, so-
You better at this point, right? Right. So how long have you guys been together?
Been together a year, 7 months now.
Very cool. Very nice. What's a question you and your man friend always get asked?
How long have we been
How
together?
long have you been together? And then what comes next? You actually don't have to been together that long to start getting this question. I run into you. Oh, hi. This is my boyfriend,
Thomas.
Thomas. Oh, great. How long have you been together? A year and 7 months. And then somebody asks, always asking. Apparently not to
You
you.
didn't ask me.
You ever been asked how you met?
Oh.
All the time, right?
Yeah.
How did you meet?
You're asking me now?
No. I don't care. I could care less about the rest of the details of your story. What are we looking for with that? We're looking, and so you guys probably, after what, 19 months, you've got a story that you've put together. You all know this, right? Been together with somebody, and then how'd you meet? And then you start launching into those familiar details. Well, you know, this happened, and then... No, you always get this part wrong. That's not how it happened. It happened this way. He always gets this part wrong. No, whatever. So anyway, and then you tell the story. And certain details of the story, you're not even sure, did they happen that way or not? Yeah, you're not lying, but the story has started to take its own life. Not in a weird way. It sounds suicidal. Just take on its own life. Sorry, not take its own life. And sorry, I know that suicide, that just went really dark really quickly. So anyway, cut that part out too. We're going to need a really top-notch editor. So it begins to take on its own life. Because humans love stories. And humans, in a very real sense, need stories. One scholar commented, we live in stories like fish live in the sea. We're so surrounded by them all the time, we barely notice that they're there. There's an old joke, it's not a very good one. But two fish are swimming along, they pass an old-timey fish. Old-timer fish says, "How's the water, boys?" And then two fish look at him, what is water? They're so in their environment, they barely notice it. We tell stories all the time. Have you ever told a dream to someone the day after?
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed it starts to become a more solidified story than it actually happened in your head?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're not sure if this happened after or before that, but it just starts to become, and you're telling before that. Because we don't just process raw information. We put it in the form of a story. We do this all the time. I mean, not even with the silliest things. You know, if you're in chemistry or something, you probably have gotten a story about some atoms and what they do together sometimes. Even when I learned to tie my shoes, my mom was telling me some weird-ass story about how two cats get into a fight and rumble around and then they're tied together, or whatever. We love stories. And that's important because the world is not just made of facts. We forget this sometimes. The world isn't just made of facts. Facts on their own are meaningless. 2 plus 2 equals 4 means nothing on its own. I could tell you, I could go up to you and say, what's your name?
Kendra.
Kendra. Hi, Kendra.
Hi.
I could go up to you and say, Julius Caesar totally crossed the Rubicon. Who cares? What does that mean? Is that why we all have heard of that, right? Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon. Famously, oh my God, your education sucks. Yes, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Famously said, Jacta alia est, the die has been cast. What was so important about that? Is that just a fact? This is what's wrong with test-taking culture these days, it seems to me. Everybody has to learn these random facts. You know who Julius Caesar was, right? Okay? He's not just a salad dressing dude. All right? What's so famous about Julius Caesar? You know any stories about Julius Caesar? What? You guys must be just nervous or something, right? Tell me something about Julius Caesar first.
I remember watching a movie about it.
Really? What movie?
I don't know.
Okay. This is the wrong crowd. Julius Caesar was the first emperor of Rome. He didn't actually become full emperor. He was made dictator, which was an emergency state, but then he kept his power. And when he crossed the Rubicon, it's important because if you know the story, Rome told him not to, because he controlled the army. And they knew Julius Caesar wanted to be the dictator. So they said, do not cross the Rubicon to disband your army. The Rubicon is a river in the north of Italy. And he crossed it anyway. And they all fled because they didn't want to be destroyed. And then there was a 4-year civil war. 4-year civil war period, about 2 years of actual war. And Caesar did emerge as the dictator of Rome, which changed history forever because he crossed the Rubicon. But just hearing Julius Caesar cross the Rubicon doesn't mean anything. If you just go up to someone randomly and say, Moses parted the Red Sea, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a fact. It's just a notion of the story. What we need is stories to make us understand, to help us understand why facts are important. They speak to each other. There are facts about the story between you and Thomas, but there's also story between you and Thomas. It's not just a group of facts. For example, let's say, we're going some weird places. Let's say someone has a stalker, okay? And this person is following this other person everywhere. Who wants to be the one who is? You. Okay. What's your name?
Ava.
Ava, you are very excited about this stalker story. So you've got this stalker, and he has magical powers, I guess, or she. I don't know. It's not.
Wait, I'm not the stalker.
Oh, okay. You're the stalker. Got some good aspirations. Yes, you're stalking Kendra. You guys are the volleyball team.
Yeah.
And you have special powers. You have lived forever, and you can be invisible, and you can record every single thing about Kendra that you ever see. You can hear her thoughts. You can put it all down. I told you. I warned you. You were like, no, I want to be the stalker! So, and then you download it all into some document and you just got fact after fact after fact after fact after fact about Kendra. But do you know anything about Kendra? Or not even about her, do you know Kendra?
I think so.
You know more about her than she knows about herself.
We spent a lot of time with her.
Yeah, but do you know her? No, because Kendra is not just a collection of facts. Kendra is more than that. Kendra has a story. Every time you meet somebody, you'll start telling each other stories. Stories constitute the very basis of our existence, the way we understand our country. It's a story. And we have different ways of thinking about that story. The British people, my sister found out, she did high school, and they didn't call it that in Britain. They don't tell the story of the American Revolution the same way we tell it. We were revolting. We tell it like we're a bunch of truth tellers, standing up to the powers. That's not how they tell it. Stories change the way you understand the facts. There's not many arguments about how the Revolutionary War took place, but there are arguments about what it means. How about this story? Every day we go to class when we were kids, and it's actually kind of creepy if you think about it. Every day at the beginning of class we stood up. We did what? We monotonely said this thing all together while staring at a flag with our hands on our hearts. And there was a stupid kid that always put his hand right here. And I told him that's not where his heart was. And he's like, yes it was, and we'd get in trouble because we'd argue. And I was like, no, it's right here, which it wasn't, it's right here, but who cares? It wasn't here, that's for sure. Alright? And yet, we're telling this story to ourselves over and over and over again. We see the flag, and we're hearing about the flag, and the stay true to the night, the flag was still there. Blah, blah, blah. How does that end? One nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Who's all? That thing was written in the 19th century, so it couldn't have included black people or Native Americans who were suffering under the doctrine of manifest destiny. So we can tell you facts, but they don't mean anything until you put them in a story. Story is how humans think of things. It's how we organize information. It's how we understand the relationships between things. Now, this is important because the Bible is not just a set of stories. It is itself a story. The word story itself comes from the Greek word historia, which is also the word we get history from. History's a story. Now, the Bible specifically has been defined in Dei Verbum as the Word of God in human language. This is important. This is the concept of dual authorship. There are two authors to the Bible: the human community that produced it, and God who spoke to them. And this is important because this makes a difference in the way that the Judeo-Christian tradition understands its relationship to its own God versus how a lot of other traditions talk about it. In our tradition, there are two authors. The human author is real and matters. It's not like, say, in the Mormon tradition where, the angel Mormo wakes up Joseph Smith and says, come here, I'm going to show you something. And they dig up these plates from the ground. And he gives them a wood pipe. He has to look through it to translate it. And then those get hidden away and no one's ever seen them again. It's not something somebody read off of a weird bunch of plates through a wood pipe. Nor is it just fallen down from the sky. It wasn't given, for example, to Moses on the Mount Sinai as like a book that just kind of fell out of heaven. It wasn't even like the Quran, which it says that was dictated to Muhammad, telling him every single word to write. No, it's a partnership. God and humans produce this document together. It is a strange thing in our tradition that the Word of God is a partnership between God and His creation. We have a place in telling the story. This is going to become important in a bit when we come back to this. But what is the story of the Bible? Because it is the Word of God in human language that is revealing the story of salvation, which actually is the story of all of history itself. So does anybody know where the Bible ends? Anybody read the end of Revelation? Not Revelations, just one. Revelation. Anybody read the end of it?
Is it heaven? No, never mind.
Are you reaching, or did you actually read it?
I've only read part of it.
Okay.
So I don't know.
This is another problem. You got to read your Bible if you want to know what it's about. I'm sorry, I'm not.
That's okay.
I'm picking on you, but you can handle it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It does end with heaven.
Okay.
Oh, she knows.
What?
She had the right answer.
You don't think I should give her trouble for that?
You should have been like, yes.
You want to teach? I'm sorry, Elise.
No, listen, why don't you know that? Point out me.
Well, yeah, maybe I should have. Either way, however this plays out, the end of the Bible ends at heaven. But not just heaven. In fact, it says a new heavens and a new earth come down from God's throne. Now this is important, because this is key also to the way that the Bible is understood by Christians. Because when that heavenly city comes down, it says, "Behold, I saw a new heavens and a new earth, and a new Jerusalem was coming down from heaven." This is, yes, the end, but it's not just the end of the world. It's a remaking of that world. It's not, I didn't see any more heavens and earth, they were gone. It's, I saw a new heaven and a new earth because the old order of things has passed away. It's a restoration. This is important, because there's another detail at the end that's really, really important that tells us what this end is that the Christian God has in mind. Because in that New Jerusalem, in the center, with a fountain with the water of life coming down, is a tree. The tree of life. That very same tree that was in the garden with Adam and Eve. It's not just a new heaven, unlike the old one. It's a restoration of what that original intention was.
It's a new story.
It's a new story, but rooted in the old one. Because remember, every time God makes something in creation, He concludes what?
It was good.
It was good. You're a character. Yes, the creation that God originally made is good. It's not just the start of something that is going to be completely done away with someday. All right? It's not just the scaffolding that gets ripped away and thrown away for the building. No, it is the basic foundation of everything that is supposed to be. So again, that also tells us a lot about the story of the Bible. Because we're not supposed to become floaty, ethereal forms staring at God and playing harps for the rest of eternity. That sounds terrible. Who wants to do that? No. God is not... creation is not some starting point that's going to be thrown away. It's going to be exactly what God gets in the end. Because God gets what God wants. That's the great thing about God. You can't frustrate His intentions. And so why is that true tree of life right there at the end? Because God gets what He intended. And so creation is not this plan A, oh, they screwed up, let's go with plan B. Rather, it was always the intention. The garden, the life that was there, the relationships, all of those very key relationships between humans and creation, between humans and other humans, between humans and self, and between humans and God. God will have that again. And so really, the story is this. God made creation good. Then he made humans, and he said it was
Good.
Good.
more than that. Very good. If I recall, the Hebrew is something like good, which is a Hebrew way of saying it's really good. But those humans, partly because of their goodness, because they had free will and rational abilities, fell. And so the story of the Bible, after that, is really God restoring what happened in the fall. Getting back what God had intended to begin with. Sin, in fact, is the word for, and sin in Hebrew is hatah. And it's an archery term. It means to miss the mark. You were aiming for a bullseye, you didn't hit it. You missed the mark. Which means intention. Nobody just puts a target somewhere. Targets have intentions to be hit. Nobody just knocks an arrow and shoots it. There's always an intention. In this case, we didn't just miss the mark, we just went, but there was an intention. God's getting that back. And so you start to see the story formulating, because after the fall, yeah, it's true, Cain and Abel. And then I think as you put it, a lot of bad stuff starts happening. That's right. First, Cain and Abel happens, and Cain kills Abel, the first murder. So we know the immediate cause of sin is violence. That relationship between humans and humans breaking down. Now they're having relations with angels, and the giants, the Nephilim, come along, and the whole world's out into, it's become completely chaotic, and God destroys it with the flood and restarts over, but they get right back up to the same tactics. And pretty soon they're building a tower, because they're going to build, this is adorable, they're going to build a tower so tall it's going to get up to God, then they're going to usurp God. Now, God is not in his heaven chamber going, oh, shoot, what are we going to do if they get up here? This is really terrifying. We better go down and confuse their language, because they're getting... No, that's not the tower. No, God's not afraid. And there's no, I don't even know, humans aren't going to build a tower long enough it's going to pierce through the edge of the universe. All right? That's not what the story's about. The story is that the only thing humans can collectively do when they're not killing each other is try to use nature badly to usurp God. It's not a literal story. It's a story about this is how bad humans are. The whole thing has gotten out of control. So far out of control that the entire creation story is lost. But then, that's Genesis chapter 11. But then something happens. In Genesis chapter 12. God breaks into history and says, Abraham, go to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a blessing to all families and humans of the earth. And Abraham does it. It's really crazy, really. I mean, he's in Ur of the Chaldeans, which is an ancient word for Babylon. And I can't imagine what it was like. He was a rich dude, so in his gated community, you got the movers out front. Everybody's mowing their lawns and watering their flowers. Abraham, where are you going? I don't know. Why are you going somewhere you don't know? God told me. Oh, God told you. Oh, goodness. Well, good luck. I'm glad you're leaving. Freaking weirdo. But this moment is important, because this is what is called God's solution to the fall, the solution to the problem. And it's important who, not just what the solution is, but who the solution is. Because it's a human. Humans messed it up. God's genius, he's going to use humans to fix it. Because that's how God works. God is freaking awesome. So he calls Abraham and makes a covenant with him. He says, you do this. You follow me. I'm going to bless everyone for you. And that leads to Israel. The establishment of the kingdom of Israel. It's a long story, which includes Moses. But part of that story goes all the way back to the beginning. Do you know what the word Israel means? You look like you almost knew.
I'm not even gonna, yes, I think we talked about it, but I don't know anymore.
You'll give it a shot.
Chosen, is it?
They are the chosen people, but that's not what Israel means.
I don't know.
It's a really cool, so Jacob, one night has a visitor come to him. He thinks he's about to die the next day. He thinks his brother, who he cheated out of a ton of stuff, including his birthright, is going to kill him. And this visitor shows up, and he wrestles with him all night. And then, finally, the guy says, Jacob, I gotta go now. I don't know what. Coffee's on. I've gotta go. I can't do this anymore. Let me go. And Jacob says, I'm not gonna let you go until you bless me. And so the man, who's never named, we know who it is, reaches out and it touches his hip, and it dislocates. And so Jacob can't wrestle anymore, but he says, you have a new name now, Jacob. It's Yisrael, because you have wrestled with God. Israel means the God wrestlers, the ones who wrestle with God. And this is their legacy. They constantly are wrestling with God. All the time, the history of Israel, you can read in the Old Testament, is Israel, 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 please, I chose you to be my people. Why are you worshiping other gods? Why are you not keeping my laws? Why are you not doing what I told you? I promised you, and I promised your father Abraham, if you do it right, I'm going to fix this whole world through you. Be a blessing this whole world through you. And they're like, yeah, I know, it's great, it's great, it's great, it's great, it's great. Let's go to the Asherah temple and worship. They don't worship Yahweh. And so finally, they're destroyed by Babylon and then exiled. And so they're not a kingdom anymore. In fact, for the next 5 centuries, and well, longer than that, but all the way up to the time of Jesus, they're just handed over from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom. There's a brief respite with the Maccabean revolt, which is where we get the books of Maccabees from. But basically, it's just Babylon, then Persia, then the Alexandrian kingdoms, and then finally Rome. And then this guy is born. And so while Israel's sitting there trying to figure out this whole exile thing and wondering when God's going to bring them back from exile and restore their place, restore the covenant, but you read all through the Psalms. Where are you, God? Where are you at? You made a covenant. You promised. Where did you go? And as they start to study their scriptures, they start to see this figure emerge named Mashiach, which is where we get the word Messiah from. It means anointed one. Its Greek translation is Christos, Christ. It means to anoint with oil, where we get the word chrism from. So Jesus' last name is not Christ, okay? He wasn't Jesus Christ born to Joseph and Mary Christ on Sycamore Lane, all right? It's a title. He is the Messiah. And as we find out after he dies and raises from the dead, he's not just man. He's God. But he's still man. And so that original solution all the way back at the beginning, creation, then the fall, make a covenant, because I'm going to use humans to be the solution. They were the ones that screwed everything up, and I'm going to use them to fix it. But then they fall. What are you going to do? Well, it's the faithfulness of one man responding to God's call because he is God. And then the reestablishment of the kingdom, which we call the church. The church is God's new kingdom on earth. And this is where we're at now. Now, to wrap up, this is important because People do different acts. I like 8 acts: creation, fall, covenant, kingdom, exile, redemption, reestablishment through the church, and restoration. People do 5 acts, 4 acts, 6 acts, 7 acts. But the point is, we all do acts because there's moments in the story that the whole Bible speaks to. Moses fits somewhere. He's part of this kingdom, this part of the establishment of kingdom, but he's not in the kingdom yet. He's still in covenant time. Where you're at in the Bible tells you how to interpret it. But the most important thing is it tells you what God's plan is for the world. And we know that that plan at the end is God is restoring what he had originally intended. The Bible ends where it begins, with the tree of life. Bonaventure said it in the most lovely way, and that tree of life is Christ himself. The big takeaway from this is that, one, the Bible is not just a collection of stories. It is itself a story that we call salvation history. I don't know how to spell it. It is a coherent, consistent narrative inspired by God, written in human language, about the story of God and man. How God is restoring everything back to the original creation. The whole story is about Genesis 1 through 3. God made something really beautiful. Humans messed it up. God's using humans to fix it. And this is going to culminate in the true man, who Paul calls the new Adam, Jesus Christ. And through Christ, all things are going to be restored back to the way they were originally, with, some cherries on top. The other thing is to understand about the Bible is when you're reading the Bible, you're not just reading a bunch of documents that are from history. As if here's the narrative of the world, and here's now, and the Bible just kind of has that little part of history, but then it ended. Revelation was written, they put it all together, and that was the end of the Bible. No. The Bible is the meaning of history. The Bible is history itself. The Bible is what gives meaning to this long, arduous, toilsome road that humans have been on since the beginning. The Bible is not something in history. We are in the history. We are in the story of the Bible. Because the Bible narrates everything from beginning to end. History is something happening in the middle. The Bible is what makes history real and makes it matter. That is why it is the true historia, or story. And all stories, including your own, are sourced in, grounded in, and a part of this great story that God is telling. I mean, at the risk of being trite or hallmarky, I just imagine in heaven around the campfire. I'm serious. And God is telling every single one of our stories. And somehow those stories, like the molecules of the universe, are all in this dance, this harmony, that brings about the totality of things. And the key, the center of that story, is Jesus and his cross, bringing all purposes together. And doesn't it just make sense? Because humans, what makes us different than all the other animals is we're the animals that tell stories. Dogs don't tell stories. Chipmunks don't tell stories. Dolphins are so smart, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, they're smart. They're super smart. I believe it. But they don't tell stories. They're really smart at being dolphins. But humans are storytelling animals. Why? Because God's creation is itself a story. God's the ultimate storyteller. Hebrews 11 says he's the author of life. I love that. And so, everything, so much of our lives, so much of history, so much of reality, so much of how we understand the world is how we story the world. How do we tell the story? Us Christians have a part to play in that, but we know the full story already. We don't have to go and find out what the story is of the world by reading the latest headline about something stupid Trump said or something some other politician did. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm not a fan of any of them. I think they're all just a bunch of buttheads. I don't even vote anymore. It's such a farce. It's a satire. It's a bad story. I don't want to be a part of it. But that's not where you're not going to get your meaning from another BuzzFeed list or what the freaking what is that stupid jackass couple? Kanye and Kim Kardashian. That's not the story. That's not the story.
They were okay with you. That was great.
Yeah. It's a bad story. It's not going to tell you anything. The best it'll tell you is just more of this. We can find that in ourselves. All we have to do is look in the mirror. I want the real story. That's what I want. And that's what the Bible is. It's not always the most scintillating reading. Okay? Nobody shoots out of bed wanting to read Leviticus and Numbers.
Yeah.
But it's part of this big story. And so when you're studying the Bible, when you're learning about Moses, you're not learning about just some old dude that did this one thing one time in history, but someone who made part of the story. Someone who's still alive right now in heaven. A saint in the chambers of God's own celestial kingdom. And this is the story God sees all the time, because God's not in time. God's eternal. So God's not watching this story progress. It has already been told in his mind. And this moment is just as much a part of it as let there be light. You get to take part in the story that gives meaning to all the other stories. And you find that in the scripture and in the church, who has been given the keys and the authority via the Holy Spirit to interpret that story. So, read your frickin' Bible. All right. Do we have time for questions, or is it time to quit?
Yeah, does anyone have questions? Where should we start if we're new to reading the Bible?
That's a great question.
Page one.
No.
You
should- It's good to know the Genesis story, but there's a lot of slogging through genealogies and stuff. I would suggest, if I had some sort of plan for the Bible, starting off, I would probably say like Romans is a good place to start. Paul takes us through the entire story of salvation. He begins with creation and the fall, and then he gets through how the fall affects everybody, and then he basically tells the story again. And by chapter 5, we have this new Adam who has now eclipsed or overcome the old Adam and has brought in this era of the Spirit, and that's Christ. So it really, especially Romans 1 through 8, Romans 9 through 11 is trickier, especially if you are, there's a lot of interpretations, and that's a problem with the Bible, is there's so many wars over what it means. And as Catholics, we are blessed in this regard because we don't have to argue about that. We have the magisterium to tell us what the Bible means. And they are, they have the keys to the kingdom, and they've been interpreting the Christian doctrine and the Christian story since the beginning of time. The beginning of the time. church. But I think Romans is a good place to start. I think that if you want to read Acts, that's really good. Will tell you the history of the early church and how it kind of got going to begin with. So that's a really cool story. I would say try to stay in the New Testament until you kind of feel like you've got your legs. But the most important thing, above all, always, 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 no matter what, is the Gospels. Read Jesus. Read what he did. Read what he said. Read all those other things too, but always, always, always have the Gospels a presence in your life because Jesus is the center of our faith. The entire Christian story is really a story of an encounter of the living God through Jesus. It is an encounter with the living Christ. That's the whole story. So everything you can do to facilitate that encounter with the living Christ is key.
Man, I can't believe you guys are really sitting. I'm late.